So the Australian Trade Union, the Builders Labourers Federation, existed from 1911 up to 1986 with a brief hiatus. It was disbanded in 1986 after a corruption scandal, which tells you that even good things come to an end. In the period we are looking at in the 1970s in New South Wales, the local leadership of the BLF was able to pull off a number of impressive environmental actions. In response to requests they got from local people, the union organised approximately 50 so-called green bans, where their members would refuse to work on or help build particular projects. Projects that were deemed to threaten local communities or historic sites. It was a period of economic growth, and in Sydney, big corporations were building large office blocks and other big buildings, and there was large-scale road building going on. The whole city was being remodelled, so there was a lot of building. The bans were often successful, and there are a number of historic sites in Sydney which would not be there today but for the work of the union. Some of the key battles that they waged, and they frequently did involve battles with the police or with hired thugs hired by the construction companies. To Australians, these have iconic names, and the names of some of the battles are Kelly's Bush, the Rocks, Woolloomooloo, Victoria Street, the Opera House car park, which had to be built underground because of a green ban, and a pub called the Newcastle Hotel, where a lot of dock workers, working class people, artists would gather, but which was supposed to be demolished to make way for some building. The BLF leader at the time, Jack Mundy, said, "Builders labourers are not going to say thank you to the boss and build what we are told. We will preserve the best of Sydney, and we will decide which buildings will be put up and which will be pulled down." And a greater assertion of working class power and confidence you could not hope to hear. And it wasn't an empty boast either. I mean, they really did literally have the power to decide what happened around many construction sites. The inner city bans often involve working with working class migrant or marginalised communities. But in places like Kelly's Bush, they were asked by a more middle class group of people to help them out. And the union did actually have debates about this, because a lot of the people that were asking for their help would not be their natural allies usually. And so they had, quite heated debates about whether they would help at Kelly's Bush, for example, but they did in the end, and that area was saved. I'm going to post, as I go along, I'm going to put some resources in the chat. I'm going to post some articles about the green bans, which will give you more details. The first one is an article that's culled from someone's PhD thesis, someone called Greg Mallory, and the thesis was written in 1999, and that will give quite a lot of detail on the green bans. And then another article by Paul Hampton from Workers' Liberty, which goes into some more detail about that. And also in the chat, I'm going to post a link to a 2-hour film called Rocking the Foundations, all about the BLF. It is an extremely good film to watch. Unfortunately, it's not, well, I mean, someone's got to make money, but it's not available on YouTube as a whole that I can see, or anywhere else. And you have to pay to watch the whole thing. In English currency, it's £3.07 at the moment, which is good value, I think. But you can arrange to do screenings of it. And so this is maybe something that we might think of doing, as lead up to COP26 or at COP26. And I'm going to post a 3-minute clip from the longer film. As I said, well, there aren't that many clips on YouTube, and this is the only one I could find. And it's okay. It gives you an idea of kind of, let's say, the brutality of the situation. Construction sites putting up buildings, knocking down buildings, and trying to stop people from knocking down buildings involves a lot of argy-bargy, should we say, between the police and communities. So the clip is quite rowdy, so I just thought I'd better give you a bit of a warning about that.
The New South Wales Department of Main Roads wanted to build 350 miles of freeways crossing the city in 6 directions, all converging on the city centre. Freeways had already affected the rocks in North Sydney. People from all over came together to stop the next stage, the Northwestern and Western Expressways. They would have evicted 80,000 people.
And if we let this freeway go through, it's going to go through the whole of Glebe and Redfern and Chippendale. And the people on low incomes who can't afford to buy their own homes are going to be forced out further and further into the outer suburbs.
These houses were the front line. After that, row after row, community after community would be knocked down, scattered, and destroyed. The BLF placed green bans on all inner-city freeway construction. On the other side of the city in Woolloomooloo, another freeway had cleared 400 residents from a community already divided by a railway viaduct. An additional 4,000 people were also evicted to make way for numerous development plans. These projects would create vast canyons of office blocks and hotels. 90,000 people would work in a 13-hectare area. Adequate transport and urban services had not even been considered. People holding out in Woolloomooloo formed an action group and successfully requested a green ban. Also threatened was a low-rent area on the cliffs above Woolloomooloo, beautiful Victoria Street. It overlooked the city and harbour, was adjacent to King's Cross, and inhabited by wharfies, sailors, artists, single people and families. A new developer and owner of Victoria Point Proprietary Limited, Frank Tiemann, was anxious to make his mark and a fortune with 3 great towers of high-rise. In just 1 week, he evicted 400 people.
I walked straight to where I lived, and my mother was sitting on the front doorstep, and she was, very, very upset. She'd been, like most of the people were. Then that I'd start to see coming out of the woodwork, they were all just sort of dazed and upset.
I'll plough on, I think, and I'm not going to speak for long, so we can have a full discussion about all different topics raised. I want to say a bit more about the BLF, and throughout the history of the BLF union, there is a struggle, as in all unions, over what sort of organisation it's going to be. I mean, to me and to most people, a trade union should be first and foremost an organisation that fights for its own members. But the situation for the builders' labourers, who are unskilled workers, were very poor and very harsh. And the union barely fought for them. So throughout the 1960s, a group of members, calling themselves rank and file, organised to democratise the union and try and take it over. And some of the characters involved in this are Jack Mundy, who you'll hear about, someone called Mick McNamara, someone called Bob Pringle, and someone called Joe Owens. So if you're reading more about the history, you will see those names as main characters. And their struggle to take control and to democratise the union was a very hard struggle. You'll see things like they decided to, call a meeting of other people that wanted to, democratise the union, and they built for like weeks and weeks and weeks, and at the end of it, 15 people turned up. So this may be a somewhat familiar story to some of us. But that's not to say that you don't keep going. They did keep going over, a decade, and they did get control of the union in the end. And control of the union was for a purpose. It's not just that they wanted to sit in an office. They wanted the union to organise to defend its members, to do the proper work of the trade union. And some of the measures they brought in to sort of keep the union on that path were things like limiting the term of office. So if you became an officer of the union, a chair or a treasurer or whatever it was, you could only hold that office for a set number of, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years or something. And the idea of this is to guard against that thing that a lot of people in trade unions will recognise, where the branch officials just basically don't do the day job anymore, but sit in an office. They lose touch with what life's actually like doing that job, particularly in like the construction industry. They could end up with cosy relationships with the construction companies, who might even pay them to do what the construction company wanted rather than what the members of the union wanted. So they had this battle basically to take control of their union and then to turn it into an organisation that actually fought for the workers, for the members. In May 1970, they set out on a several-month-long strike called the Margin Strike, and they fought for wage increases, and they fought for industrial recognition of their skills. Obviously, I said there were unskilled workers, but even they had skills. And a lot of their ambition over time was to reduce the gap between the so-called unskilled workers, the labourers, and the trades like carpenters or electricians. And so they had these extremely militant strikes over several months throughout 1970 and then 1971. And because they succeeded in these, it actually raised it raised the living standards of the members, but it also raised their confidence, and it raised their morale in the sense that they felt they could do more things and they wanted to do more things. And I think that built a platform for them to go on and then do their more political activity. But you had to have the one before you could have the other. So Jack Mundy said, if it wasn't for the civilising of the building industry in campaigns of 1970 and 1971, I'm sure we wouldn't have had the luxury of the membership going along with us in what was considered by some as avant-garde way out action of supporting mainly middle-class people in environmental actions. I think that gave us the mandate. So when we think about the BLF, the avant-garde actions included such things as opposing the Vietnam War, supporting Aboriginal Australian rights, supporting women workers in the construction industry, and supporting lesbian and gay rights. And I think this is very worth keeping in mind. There's a kind of climate around parts of the labour movement in the UK today of denouncing woke culture. I mean, parts of like the Morning Star newspaper will denounce woke culture, as along with the Daily Mail. So I think it's worth thinking that these were like blue collar working class men in Australia in the 1970s, defying that stereotype of what working class men are interested in, prepared to campaign over. Right, I'm going to post a few more resources in the chat. And one of them is an interview with Jack Mundy made in 2015 when he was 85. The links, the video is about 12 minutes long, so I don't suppose that we watch it now. But it goes a bit more into his experience and how proud he was of the political activity that they carried out. And Jack Mundy died in May 2020 last year, age 90. So on the internet, you will actually find quite a lot of tributes to him, a lot of memories of that time. But for Mundy and for a lot of those people, politics was actually central to what they thought trade unions should do. Jack Mundy said, "What is the good of fighting to improve wages and conditions if we are going to choke to death in polluted and planless cities?" I can't think of a more, appropriate quotation for trade union movement today. Really, we should make placards and take that to trade union conferences, I think, when you consider their, say, backward attitude to environmental campaigning. I'm not going to go into any more history. I want to summarise what I take as the lessons from this story, and then maybe just pose a few questions or open it up for conversation, discussion. The three lessons I take, and these are not necessarily rules I put them, the other way around. One is the need for political organisation within trade unions. That is, they need to be political bodies. They shouldn't just be taking care of like wages and conditions, but they should be looking to take political action. And I think the better they are at organising around the bread and butter things, the better a platform it gives them to do political activity. And it's also worth keeping in mind that Jack Mundy and people around him were political people. A lot of them were in the Australian Communist Party, which I don't know a great deal about it, but it was a sort of a less Stalinist, more dissident communist party than other communist parties. The lesson number 2 is the vital importance of organising rank and file control of the trade unions, democratising them so that they actually represent their members. And then the third thing is that, as I said, that unions fight for the bread and butter concerns of their members. If they're not doing that, then basically they're not fit organisations for anything. And I think we have a lot, it's particularly in Britain, we have a lot of absolutely enormous trade unions that aren't even fighting on the bread and butter issues. And obviously we've got a long way to go to persuade them to fight crucial environmental battles. I do want to open up for conversation and then, look at the camera, and then ask some questions, which are like, this is obviously an inspiring story. How do we get our own trade unions to fight on environmental issues? Where can we see the potential for environmental activists and trade unionists working together at the moment? And obviously it's really crucial that we do this quickly. The third thing was just to encourage people to join their own trade unions. You don't have to be have the industrial might of a builder's labourer. We can all join trade unions and take up environmental issues in our workplace and use that as a key to get people to do more environmental campaigning with a bigger view of what lies ahead and what we need to do.